From the gridiron to the hardwood, James Mesh breaks it all down. It's time for another episode of Cleats and Sneaks.
Welcome back to another edition of Cleats and Sneaks. We're going to start looking at the NFL divisions and start previewing each one of these teams as we get closer and closer towards the 2025 regular season for the NFL. For right now, let's look at the NFC and AFC South division, so knocking out a quarter of the teams already. We'll start off on the NFC side and actually look towards our local team, the New Orleans Saints. And we'll even look at the additions, their subtractions, the team overall, take a look at the schedule, their draft class, and I'll just give you my overall thoughts on each one of those teams. Starting off with the black and gold, the big additions I'd say that they made was signing Justin Reed, signing Julian Blackmon, which is funny enough, something they did just the other day, right before training camp had started. And then right at the beginning of the free agency period in the new league year, they actually traded for Patriots defensive tackle Devon Gottschall, funny enough, a Louisiana native. Same thing with Justin Reed. The big subtractions that happened, players that were relinquished, I'd say it was Paulson Adebo. I can't count Marshawn Lattimore because that happened in the middle of last season, but I'd say Adebo. I'd say Marquez Valdes-Scantling was actually a really interesting one since you weren't expecting a whole lot from him, but the fact that he had such a big impact for the Saints after so many wide receivers had gone down, him being there and actually being productive was huge. And then I'd say Tyrann Mathieu, since he did retire just the other day, which prompted the Julian Blackmon signing. Looking at this team and even looking at their draft class, going back to it, first round, 9th overall, they took Kelvin Banks, offensive lineman, offensive tackle, out of Texas. Second round, 8th overall, so 40th. They took Tyler Shuck out of Louisville, the quarterback. Vernon Braun was their one of their 2 third-round picks. He was a defensive tackle also for the Longhorns. The other third-rounder was Jonas Sanker out of Virginia, a safety. They got Danny Sussman, the Oklahoma linebacker, in the 4th round. The other was Quincy Riley, the corner out of Louisville. So a pair of Longhorns from Texas and then a pair of Cardinals from Louisville. Their 6th rounder was Devin Neal, the running back out of Kansas. They took Maliki Matavo out of UCLA. He's a tight end. And then Fadil Diggs, the edge rusher for the Syracuse Orange, in the 7th. Same thing with Matavo. He was also a 7th round pick. Looking at the team overall, I think this one is really interesting because one thing you really have to note is the quarterback battle, and something that's really been noticed so far is you would have thought it would have been Tyler Shuck and Spencer Rattler as the only 2 quarterbacks, but up to this point, through the first 6-7 practices, it's just been a rotation of Spencer Rattler gets one day as the first team guy, Shuck gets the next go around, and then it's Haener right after, and then the cycle continues. Today, looking at it, July 30th, Wednesday, Haener was actually, this was the second go around for him, getting the first team reps. So Kellen Moore and company, the new head coach for the Saints, they're really doing their due diligence, which is something a little bit different than maybe you would have anticipated. You would have thought maybe it would have been a 2 quarterback race, but the fact that the oldest guy in the room, technically Jake Haener, he's even getting a shot as well. What is interesting, though, is I'm not too sure how much longer Haener's going to be able to do it, because he was kind of behind in a sense of he was recovering from his oblique injury. But the fact that it's not necessarily just about what's going on the field within the practice, but also just the mental reps, going through the practice review. The fact that they're doing the film review after the practices. They're doing the meetings. They're doing the walkthroughs afterwards. The whole process of what Kellen Moore's practices look like and what a day as a New Orleans Saint under Kellen Moore's tutelage has looked like. It's been actually pretty interesting that it's so far been a 3 quarterback race. We're a little bit over a week into it now, but I am curious as we get to that first preseason game on August the 10th, does it actually whittle down to 2 quarterbacks, or does it take a couple of preseason games before we actually see it become a 2 quarterback race? I really am curious to see how this develops, and once we get some real game action, I know it's not going to be the most exciting thing in the world, but still actually seeing some game action, trying to figure out who gets the leg up in this quarterback race. I'm not taking too much away from the fact that Spencer Rattler got the first team reps first, and if I had to guess, Spencer Rattler will also be getting the starting quarterback in preseason game number 1 for the Saints, which, in case you are wondering, that first preseason game on August 10th will be against the Los Angeles Chargers. Funny enough, they will be going on the 6th through the 15th over there to California, so it makes the traveling easier. They'll also do some joint practices, if I'm not mistaken, with Los Angeles. So this will be something to make note of over you get through the last couple of days before they get into that preseason game, because then the next 2 will be home games against the Jaguars and Broncos before that week 1 matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals. So the big road trip that they will make will be coming up within the next week or so, and they'll be there for a little over a week. And in between it will be the actual game, preseason game versus the Chargers. But looking at the team overall, the quarterback position, no doubt something to look for, because you got to figure out, is it going to be second-year quarterback Spencer Rattler, who had 7 total appearances on the field, but 6 starts. Majority of them, though, was pretty much with practice squad guys, so you can't really take too much away from what Rattler did. It wasn't much, but it's like, what do you expect? He was running with other guys against actual NFL teams that were pretty healthy and really healthy compared to what the Saints were looking like last year. So I don't take too much from what Rattler did. To me, it's a clean slate. And it makes the most sense for Kellen Moore and his staff as well. Because, like, why would I mean, sure, I can look at what you did last year, but I didn't see all the nuances. I didn't see the little things behind the closed doors of what it was looking like for each one of you. So even though Rattler didn't look good last year and Haener got half a start because he started the first half, they benched him versus Washington, and then that's when Rattler came in afterwards for the remainder of that game through the whole second half. It's really interesting to see, and I'm actually glad that Kellen Moore is going through the extra due diligence, trying to make sure that he looks at this quarterback room and makes the correct decision. You don't want to rush into it, because this is a long-term play. If you figure out that Shuck, Rattler, or even Haener is actually a quarterback that you like, and you think you could build around this and build upon this for years to come, as crazy as it sounds, and depending on who you talk to, this is either the worst organization and worst team going into 2025, or even a team that could surprise some people and make the playoffs. You got to make sure that you are doing this the right way. You got to make sure that you're finding the quarterback that runs the system the best and gives you the best chance to be in winning positions and actually win a couple of games. That's what's really important. It's not just going with the guy and sticking with it, and as soon as it doesn't work, then you just move on to the next. No, you have all this time to actually figure out what's best for you. So the quarterback battle is interesting. The fact that it is actually a 3-player race instead of it 2. It's different than what a lot of people would think, but I think this is the correct way to actually do this. Running back, I am curious. Alvin Kamara, this feels like something that actually will work better for his skill set. I think in years past, and I understand that this was leading to his first 1,000-yard rushing season last year, which is good, which was nice to see. But that was under different systems. What we're going to see with Kellen Moore and company is different. I think it actually fits with what Kamara needs to do. Kamara works best when he's out in space. Usually putting him in the A gap between the center and guard, not the best. And it's sometimes okay between the guard and tackle. But what's best is when he goes on these outside runs, when he gets out in space, when you design him to try and figure out and see better. Because going behind the offensive line, it's not like he's super short. He's 5'10". But at the same time, when you get Kamara out in space, as you always remember, those toss crackbacks, and you get him closer towards the sideline, Kamara oftentimes, that's where his best success is. Because then he could turn that corner, break a couple of tackles, keep his balance going, and get those extra yards. Trying to bang him up the middle on those wham power runs, not always the best. Usually not the way to go for a guy like Kamara. But what is interesting is there's actually a pretty big slew of running backs that the Saints have. that do have a good bit of NFL experience. Kendre Miller is a guy that's been so far disappointing for the Saints and for the fan base. But looking at him overall, at 23 years old, I know he's dealt with a couple of injuries, and I think as a lot of us would describe, if you paid attention to him and Dennis Allen, Kendre Miller, for one reason or another, was in the doghouse. This also feels like another clean slate. Now that Dennis Allen is gone, Kellen Moore is in. This feels like this actually could be a different year in a building block year for Kendre Miller to actually feel like, hey, I am an NFL running back that can actually do this. The first sign of it was last year in New York, or I guess New Jersey, but against the Giants, when you actually saw him a good amount of carries. Could this be something that you actually see in 2025 and see more often compared to years past? The big question is he going to be available? I mean, so far with the way that it's gone, yeah. Now we need to see them actually play, and it's only been a couple of days of pads, but hitting other guys on opposing teams, for example, like the Chargers in the preseason games, we'll start to see. But as of right now, I like it. I also just like the depth in general. Cam Akers, who was a former Ram and Vikings running back that dealt with a couple of Achilles injuries, especially early on in his career, he's still 26, and look, he may not have a lot of tread left on the tires because of those early injuries. It could shorten his career for sure. But I think he's a guy that still has a real chance of making this team, and it's the same thing with someone like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, former LSU Tiger and national champion. I am curious to see how these guys work because there's a couple of other guys like Devin Neal, who, again, was taken in the 6th round. He's got a lot of pop. He's got a lot of burst. He's a guy that if you give him some carries and if he gives enough opportunities, I wouldn't be surprised if Devin Neal actually surprises a lot of people and is one of those sleeper running backs, especially if you're looking at fantasy, that in say, the next year or two, let's say Kamara ends up leaving, Devin Neal's a guy that, even though he's a little bit not as big, he's still 5'11", 213, which is a pretty solid size. You look at Akers, he's 5'10", 217. They're pretty close overall, but I am curious with Neal, what kind of opportunity is he going to get over this year and the next year? But this running back room overall, especially including other guys like Marcus Yarns, and you also look towards Velus Jones Jr., who was a wide receiver, but kind of more of a special teams guy. Do they even have a real chance? I'm curious. You look towards the wide receivers, depending on who you talk to, especially in the Who Dat Nation, you feel like you would want a big body wide receiver because your main focus is Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, and Brandon Cooks, who returns to the Saints after being gone for the longest time. All three of those guys are burners, guys that take the top off the defense. Who's the big body receiver? Because remember, for the longest time, it was Marcus Colston. Then it transitioned over to Michael Thomas. Who is it now? Could it be Juwan Johnson, who was a wide receiver at one point but got converted into a tight end? Very good chance. That's something that we also need to look out for. But I do think it is something that you do need to make note of, because as of right now, they have made no signs. There's been no indication of them actually going for that quote-unquote big body receiver. Someone that kind of plays those jump ball situations. That another example outside of the wide receivers, kind of going to a tight end as well, was Jimmy Graham. One of the best to ever do it. Former basketball player himself. I'm very confident that he never lost a jump ball situation, especially under Drew Brees as quarterback. So that's something to make note of, because this tight end position as well, not quite sure, since Taysom Hill and Foster Moreau are still recovering from the late season injuries that they sustained last year. They might be back at the first quarter mark through the first 4 or 5 games, maybe, but that's still being pretty optimistic. So if Juwan's going to be that versatile piece that kind of goes back and forth between tight end and wide receiver, who else is going to step up? Jack Stoll is a former Eagle that kind of basically came with Kellen Moore to join the Saints, and he's more of a blocking guy, which would help, since I believe Kellen Moore is going to run more of a running scheme. It's going to be more heavily predicated towards the run as the base of the offense, instead of, since he is a former quarterback, you would think it'd be more passing. But I think Kellen really understands that the emphasis is making sure that you have that running game established. That way it's easier on the quarterbacks, especially quarterbacks that the Saints have, where they don't have a lot of experience. And a big part of that is making sure that you have your offensive line set. And I'm going to be honest, I think this offensive line has a really good chance to look better than it has in years past. Ryan Ramczyk officially retired, but he hasn't really played for the Saints in a couple of years because of that injury that he eventually had to retire for. But at this point, Kelvin Banks, as I brought up, the first-round pick, he's pretty much slotted to be the left tackle. You look towards the right tackle, it was Trevor Penning last year, but now at this point, it's going to be Fuaga. And he played left tackle last year as a rookie. He did pretty good there, hit the rookie wall a little bit, as to be expected. But my thing is, I think this works a lot better because Kelvin Banks always played left tackle, or a majority of his career he did. Fuaga predominantly played in his natural position as right tackle. So even though these are young guys, these feel like cornerstone tackles that could work for you for the years to come. The thing is, once you get towards the interior, Cesar Ruiz, yes, he's a guard, and I think he's a solid player. He's not great. I wouldn't say he's really good. But if everything works out, I think Cesar Ruiz is a guy that if he is your fourth or fifth best offensive lineman, a part of the starting group, I'd say you're doing pretty good. We still need to make sure that the young guys in Fuaga and Banks work out, but I think they will. Just need to see it on the field. Eric McCoy, I'd say, is one of the best centers in the NFL. So as long as he's able to still do his thing and he remains healthy, this feels really good. And then at that point, the big question mark was Trevor Penning. He didn't work out left tackle. They tried him out last year, right tackle, did better, but there's still a lot to be improved upon. The fact that he is likely going to move to guard and probably be that starting left guard for the Saints, this feels like a much better and much smoother, more smooth transition for him to be the best player that he can be. I'm not expecting a Pro Bowl, all-pro level guard out of Penning, but boy, do I expect a lot more competency. And if that's the case, this offensive line could look actually pretty daggone good. That's something to really make note of as you go through this 2025 season. Now, the defense is really interesting because instead of it being a predominant man coverage team with a 4-3 front, Brandon Staley's coming in, and he's going with the multiple more 3-4 front where it's 3 down linemen, 4 linebackers, and then you have the 4 secondary guys. A lot of switching in and out. But what is interesting to see is how many defensive linemen that they have. And even guys that got transferred to outside linebackers. The predominant ones are Chase Young and Carl Granderson, who were the more of the edge rushers that you would look at more often than not last year. Those guys are going to be probably outside linebackers. That's something to make note of. Whether they go into the 3-point stance or the 2-point stance, depending on the situation, we'll have to see. But those guys are more of linebackers that are going to play with guys like Demario Davis, like Pete Warner, and even some other guys that may find a way onto the field, for example, like rookie Danny Stutzman. The thing, though, is, with all those guys, I am curious. Devon Godshaw, he's going to be your nose tackle. Line up right in front of the center and absorb as many blockers as possible. He is going to take up the middle, much like we'd seen like the big boy Vince Wilfork back in those Patriots days. If you remember the early to mid 2010s and even the late 2000s, Vince Wilfork was a guy that just ate up blocks. The Saints are looking for that from Godshaw. That also would leave other opportunities for guys like Cam Jordan, who's coming towards the tail end of his career. Give him some extra open blocks, and it's the same thing with a young developing player like Brian Bresee, who I expect to really take that next step forward and start to be the guy on that defensive line. We'd seen it for the longest time. It was Cam Jordan, and you had Demario at the linebacker position, still figuring out who's going to replace him, but you're looking for a key guy at each one of those 3 levels of the defense. For the longest time, it was Cam Jordan. I think this is the real opportunity, and this is the year that you see Brian Bresee take that next level and start to be like, Cam, I got you, dog. This is my defensive line now. Still trying to figure out what's going to happen with linebacker, but I feel very confident that going into year 3, Brian Bresee is going to be that guy. And then when you look towards the secondary, I have a lot of questions. Justin Reed and Julian Blackmon at safety. This actually feels like a better tandem than what we've seen in the last couple of years. I know Tyron is a really good player and was a really good pro for the longest time. But him matched up with anyone else, whether it was Marcus May or Will Harris or whoever, I don't think it's going to be as good of a safety tandem as what we're going to see this year with Blackmon and Reed. I think this is going to work out really well for the two of them because I expect Reed to be in the box a good bit. Then you have Julian Blackmon play more of that over-the-top safety. But the fact that this is also going to be a zone coverage team, they're going to be able to disguise a whole bunch of things, which makes things really excited for me. The big question mark, though, is what happens at cornerback? Because they moved on from Marshawn Lattimore last year. They let Paulson Debo walk in free agency. They still have Alontae Taylor. But how is this going to work? Because if the base defense is going to be a 3-4, they can't run three corners out there, and they figured out their safety situation. Alontae predominantly has played in the nickel. He's played in the slot. He didn't look too great last year on the boundary as a corner, but I think the fact that it's going to be more zone coverage, this could work out. I don't think it's going to work out great, but I think this will work out better for him as a boundary compared to last year because putting him on an island as a man coverage guy, it didn't work out too well. But I think in scenarios where it's going to be two corners, you'll see Kool-Aid McKinstry, who I still need to see more from, but he showed some promise last year. He's more likely than not going to be your boundary guy. And then you're going to have Alontae as the opposite. But when you have three corners, Alontae's going to move back towards the nickel where he works better. And then, unless they sign someone like Asante Samuel Jr., I would not be surprised at all if you see rookie Quincy Riley, the other fourth-round pick for the Saints, earn his spot and actually be the other boundary corner in those types of scenarios. And then you have rotation here and there, but a good bit of inexperience at the corner position, which is still a question mark for me, but I can see the vision of what the Saints are going for. Nothing's really changed when it comes to the special teams. You're still going to likely roll with Blake Grupe as your kicker, and then you got Matthew Hayball, which was a pretty big improvement from what we had seen punting last year. And then Zach Woods, just the long snapper. You have nothing to worry about there. So overall, I think we could see some surprise from the Saints next year. I don't know how many wins that's going to lead to. I'll get to that in a later video, in a later podcast. But overall, this team feels younger and better from what we've seen in years past. When you look towards the Atlanta Falcons, though, this is a team that makes things really interesting because they picked up quite a few guys. I think the guys to make the most note of when it comes to their additions, they made a lot of additions, but the one that stands out the most was the fact they got Leonard Floyd. They also added into that linebacker room by getting Divine Diablo, former Raiders guy. And then you even look, if I had to pick a third one, D. Alford's an interesting one, but I'd probably say Jordan Fuller's an interesting one. These are a lot of guys that are more depth pieces because the Falcons signed quite a few guys, but Morgan Cox seems like a guy that actually could help that defensive line, going from the Chargers to Atlanta. The big subtractions that Atlanta had, Grady Jarrett, he ended up going to Chicago along with Drew Dowman as the center. So those are two big losses there in the trenches. The other big loss that I'd say they had was moving on from either Lorenzo Carter or Eddie Goldman. A lot of big-time losses toward the trenches, I noticed as I'm looking at this. But also looking towards the team as a whole. And even looking at the Falcons draft class, they got Jalen Walker, which was kind of surprised. We thought Jalen Walker was going to be a top 10 pick. He ends up getting picked 15th. They ended up trading back into the first round and got James Pierce. So even though they lost a good bit along the edge, they picked up a Georgia linebacker and one of the top edge rushers overall from Tennessee in James Pierce Jr. So even though they lost a good bit, they addressed it right back, not only in free agency, but also in the draft as well. They then got back into the third round and got Xavier Watts, the safety out of Notre Dame. They got Billy Bowman Jr., a safety out of Oklahoma. And then in the seventh round, they got Jack Nelson, offensive tackle out of Wisconsin. So it was a smaller class than what you had seen with the Saints, but I think what's really interesting to see with Atlanta is, does Michael Penix Jr. take that step forward? Because to begin the year, it was Kirk Cousins. Then, once it started to go not so good, they said, you know what, let's make the transition. Let's go to Penix, let's see what he's got. And I think Penix showed some good things last year, but there was definitely still a lot to improve upon if they really want to take that next step forward. The thing, though, is, even though they lost Drew Dalman, their center, they ended up replacing him with what's going to look like as Ryan Nuzell, who was a guard for quite a while, but 27 years old, he's still out of App State, going into his fourth season. That's something to make note of, because remember, for the longest time, we looked at it. Saints always put heavy draft pick and draft capital into the trenches. You see it really specifically with the Falcons, because I remember for a few years, Atlanta had 5 first-round offensive linemen a part of their offensive line. They still got a few of those. They still got Jake Matthews, and they still got Caleb McGarry, and even Chris Lindstrom as their 2 tackles and guard. But what's really interesting is looking at those skill position guys. Those guys are what's really going to be make note of how easy is it going to be for Penix to get those guys the ball. Because Drake London is one of the best 50-50 guys in the NFL. I expect him to still have that trajectory and still take those steps forward to being one of the best NFL receivers. Darnell Mooney, he was up and down last year. There were certain points where you were like, wow. Because you saw the flashes in Chicago. It's just Justin Fields couldn't get him the ball. And you thought you were going to see that more consistently in his first year in Atlanta. And you saw it at times. But it didn't show up as much throughout the year as maybe you would have hoped. Because I still think Darnell Mooney is a pretty good receiver. It's just the production's never there. That's something to really make note of. Other guys in the room, they did sign former LSU Tiger DJ Chark, and they did get Cardero Hodge in free agency. But Ray McLeod is a guy that you would expect to probably be the wide receiver 3. DJ Chark just feels like a guy that he's fighting for those last couple of spots. He's not super old. He's still only 28. But still, the fact that you've kind of bounced around, he probably will end up making the team. But the fact that this is his 5th team in 5 years really started to become very much a journeyman receiver for DJ Chark. The big thing, though, is that running back room. Really not much has changed because the main 2 is Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. The main thing is Robinson because he is one of the best running backs in the NFL. He is a special, special talent. And you can see it. Anytime he gets the ball in his hands, magic happens. It's incredible to see. So he is a great workhorse back. But even then, they still try to get some love to Tyler Algier, which to me, Algier is one of the most underrated running backs in the NFL. And that hurts to say as a guy that really is a fan of the Saints. But those 2 running backs in Atlanta's backfield, whew, man, those 2 are a problem. The big thing, though, is the hole at tight end. They didn't lose Kyle Pitts, but Pitts has been an utter disappointment so far. And you've heard good signs at the early part of camp, but I'm just taking that at face value. I'm not putting too much stock into Kyle Pitts. He's really got to prove it to me if he's actually going to savor what expectations left that we had of Kyle Pitts. Because remember, there was so much hype going into him before the season and before his rookie year. And you thought, okay, well, it's just rookie season. Like, he'll figure it out. But since then, it's still been pretty disappointing. So, Kyle Pitts, even though he is still on the Falcons team, I really got to see a lot from him this coming up season if it's not going to be a hole. Because you look at the rest of that team, it's Charlie Warner, who more predominantly is a blocking guy. He doesn't put up a whole lot of stats. Last year, just to put it in perspective, he had 7 catches for 46 yards, no touchdowns. The guy doesn't get the ball. He's there to block, and that's it. And then you even look at Felipe Franks, who was a former quarterback And now he's a tight end, and he had 1 catch last year for 12 yards. So, tight end is a weak point for me. You would have thought it was a strength a couple years ago, but they continue to not have too much stock into that. So, it's really going to be on the wide receivers and the running backs to make big-time plays for Michael Penix so he can take that next step forward as a pro. The defense, it's still really interesting. I brought up a lot of the additions that they had made. Walker, you look at Leonard, David Onyemata is still with them, Morgan Fox. James Pierce, he's going to have to be a part of that rotation along the edge rushers and the defensive line for them. But that secondary is still pretty interesting. They still have Jesse Bates with them. They thought the safety that they had signed last year would work and be an absolute dynamic duo as a tandem over there at secondary and the safety. It just didn't work out. They moved on from him. They still have Jesse Bates, one of the best safeties in the NFL, but they replaced him with Jordan Fuller to be a long Bates. A.J. Terrell is still recognized as one of the better corners. I am a lot lower on Terrell, and I've been like that for quite a while now, even going back to college. I don't see it as much. Maybe I just don't watch enough film of Terrell, but I just haven't been as impressed with him as maybe some other people. Mike Hughes, he's okay. And then same thing with D. Alford. I think those are some all right guys, but that defensive line and that front seven for Atlanta better be absolutely mauling quarterbacks and blowing up run plays if we're going to see this defense as a whole be better than what we've seen in the past, because Atlanta's defense has been very disappointing. And I mean very disappointing from what we've seen in years past. Younghoe Koo is still the kicker for them, and then they're still going to roll with Bradley Pinion, who's all right punter. I mean, can't really complain about him too much. And then Liam McHugh is, or Liam McCullough, I should say. Long snapper, don't know too much about him. But the fact that they do have Jamal Agnew, that's scary. Jamal's pretty good in the return game. More dominantly going to be more of a punt returner than he would be a kick returner. It just kind of depends on the formations. But if Jamal Agnew gets the ball in special teams, you better watch out. And special team coordinators better make sure that he gets the ball as little as possible. So, Atlanta, someone to also look out for as we go into this 2025 season. When you look towards the Carolina Panthers, this team is actually really interesting to me. There's a lot to make note of because you look at last year, absolutely disappointing. They definitely weren't all that great, but they did show signs of, look, they might be a lot more competent of a team than last year, and I think a big part of that was the fact that Bryce Young looked really bad to start. They benched him for a little while, went to Andy Dalton. They came back to Bryce Young, and all of a sudden you start to see the wheels actually turn in his brain for Young. I think that was a huge stepping stone in his development because I'm going to be honest, if he went back out there and stunk it up again and just wasn't productive for Carolina, you very easily could have seen, instead of them going to Ted McMillan 8th overall, maybe have gone to get a quarterback. So I think that's what's really interesting. And that's what's going to be the big key piece for the Panthers. The big additions that they made over the offseason to me was getting Trayvon Moehrig. I am still a guy that's a Moehrig guy. I really wish the Saints would have picked him a couple years ago. It didn't really work out for him in Vegas with the Raiders. But now that he's in a different spot, him with someone like Jeremy Chin, I think this could be something that works out really, really well. Or, I'm sorry. Jeremy Chin's not there anymore. Jeremy Chin actually isn't with them. But what is interesting is the fact that you look at some of the other guys that the Panthers have got. It was a lot of low-key signings. It was a lot of depth pieces. So you didn't see any big flashy pieces be added. Rico Dowdle's an interesting addition because they still have Chuba Hubbard, which was a guy that they extended after a breakout season last year. But the fact that they moved on from Miles Sanders and basically Dowdle and Sanders just switched. Dowdle coming from Dallas, now going to Carolina, and then vice versa for Sanders. Chuba Hubbard, Rico Dowdle, and Trevor Etienne as your backfield. It's actually not too bad. Etienne was a little bit underproductive. You would probably expected more when he was with Georgia. But the fact that you're not asking him to do too much right now, and he can sit behind pros like Hubbard, like Dowdle, who finally got his chance and showed you a little bit over there with the Cowboys. I think this works out really well. Now, the thing is, when you look at the wide receiver position, there's a lot of guys, and I'm not sure who's going to stick out. That's the big question mark for me. There's a lot of guys that I think could step up for the Panthers, but the question is, who does Bryce Young like the most? Because they took Ted McMillan 8th overall. You expect him to get the ball and definitely have a lot of opportunities to get the ball. But then you have longtime veteran Adam Thielen. The thing is, though, does Adam Thielen have anything left, or how much more does he have left in the tank? I don't know. That's what I'm curious about. I thought maybe he would have started to really slow down 2 years ago, but he did it. And then he even went to last year, and you start to see a little bit of signs. So I think we're starting to really see Thielen's career start to come to a close. But he's still there, and unless some of these younger guys start to actually step up, it's still just going to have to be Thielen. Xavier Legette was a first-round pick last year, and he showed signs here and there, but there wasn't too much to make note of because you would have thought for a guy that was taken in the first round, 32nd overall, he technically didn't even put up 500 yards receiving. So something curious to make note there. Jalen Coker, though, is a guy that I am very curious about to see if he's a guy that could carve out a role because he put up very similar stats to Legette last year, had less scores, but to me is a more competent receiver and a more consistent guy that Bryce Young could go to. But at that point, I've talked about 4 guys already, and we're not quite sure who's going to step up. Hunter Renfrew, former Raider, who we thought was retired, done with football, decided to come back and is now with the Panthers. But you don't have to worry about him on the outside. He's going to be in the slot. He's going to be working with those short intermediate routes for Bryce Young to dump off to. But then you also have other guys like Jimmy Horn, who they got in the draft. Same thing with David Moore, who's been there for a couple years now. Like, they have some big decisions to make. Do they roll with 6? And even then, are those 6 guys, which one of those guys actually steps up? That's what I'm really curious about, is that wide receiver position and how uncertain it is. Because I could see it going in a myriad of different directions. Ted McMillan, he's going to play a bunch of snaps. There's no way unless something utterly happens with him, say an injury, or he just really falls behind. But outside of that, the fact that he was taken 8th overall by the Panthers, McMillan's going to get his snaps. He's going to get his share. It's just what happens with the rest of these guys. How does it unfold there? That's something to make note of. At the tight end position, Tommy Tremble is still listed as the first tight end, but if Jatavian Sanders takes the step forward that I would think he would, you could definitely see him being the more consistent tight end and someone that Bryce Young could go to as a security blanket. But I do need to see it actually happen. Tommy is dealing with a injury right now. He is started off on the PUP list, so you're not quite sure how far behind is he going to be. But this does lead to more opportunities on the practice field in training camp for Sanders to actually prove himself. The offensive line, there's definitely been investment into it because they got Damian Lewis, former LSU Tiger. They also got Robert Hunt, former Louisiana Raging Cajun, both guards right there. So you feel pretty secure, especially if you're from the Louisiana, Lafayette, Acadiana area and you know what these guys are about. You feel pretty confident that they should still be able to do their thing. Taylor Moton, I'm not sure. I don't feel great about it, but Ike Ekwonu, the tackle for the Panthers, I am curious because Austin Corbett as their center, I feel like the fact that they've put so much investment over the last couple of years into the offensive line to protect Bryce Young, who, if you've seen Bryce Young play before, he's not the biggest guy, but it's something to definitely make note of, that I think that this Panthers offense, once they start to actually figure out who's going to be their main guys, this could work out really well as an offense for Carolina. I definitely think so. And they very possibly could be a sleeper team going into this 2025 season. The defense, I think it's actually pretty interesting to look at. Derek Brown's still their big-time defensive lineman. I know they got Bobby Brown, but you look towards the front seven, you don't have a bunch of big-time guys, but you have a lot of depth. You no longer have Shaq Thompson, and you don't have some of these other guys that you had before in years past. But Nick Scordon, I am curious to see, can he actually carve a really good starting role for the Panthers? Former Texas A&M Aggie. But if he can, you'd feel better. You'd feel better about this front seven. Because you look towards the secondary, you got Mike Jackson, you got J.C. Horn, you got Mo Rig, who I brought up from free agency earlier. They got Nick Scott as their projected starting safety on the opposite side of Mo Rig. But the defense, it needs to make sure that it steps up. I have very similar questions to the Panthers defense as a whole, much like I do with Atlanta. I feel like Atlanta could do some good things and actually take that step forward, but I actually got to see it because they refuse to do so. The Panthers, because Derek Brown is so good, I feel a little bit better just because of how safe he is as a player. But if some of these guys could actually step up, you look at Ashawn Robinson, who started to become more of a depth piece after getting Treshaun Warden. The front seven is a big-time question mark for me because I'm not sure if any of these guys are going to be there in the next couple of years. So that's something to really make note of if I'm Carolina, is you need to figure out that front seven and really figure out that linebacker position in that linebacker group, because you've gotten rid of a couple big-time pieces over the last couple of years. How are you going to replace them? That's a big question that needs to be answered. Sam Martin is the punter. Matthew Wright is the kicker. I'm curious to see if these young guys really step up and can carve out a role, at least on special teams. When you look at Horn, when you look at Etienne, but we'll just have to see. I think Carolina as a whole, I think you can see strides be taken forward on offense, but I want to see what happens and who becomes the starter and who makes the 53 for the Panthers. When you look towards the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, there's no question that you look at them and it's no surprise that they're the team to beat in the South for the NFC. I mean, they did the last couple of years. The big-time additions that they got was getting Hassan Reddick. That was really good to see. You look towards Anthony Walker, pretty solid. They got him on a cheap deal, $1.4 million for 1 year. And Bryce Hall is actually another interesting pickup for not a lot of change. He got just over $1.1 million. They weren't really any big time additions, but some motion that they had in the draft was where I wanted to go. And I'll get to that in just a second, because it's not like they moved on for too many guys. But Joe Tryon, he ended up going to the Browns. You got Mike Edwards, who was one of their safeties. He actually decided to go to Kansas City. And then you even had KJ Britt, who was another one of their linebackers. He said deuces. He headed to Miami. But the big one, Robert Hainsley, the center, he actually didn't even go far. He had Jacksonville to be their center. So you saw a couple of players leave, which to be expected. I don't think it's going to hurt them too much, though. When I look at this team, I still expect a lot. I still expect a lot of good things from them. Because when you look at the Buccaneers, they still have Baker Mayfield as their quarterback. Bucky Irving looks to be like one of the new rising stars at the running back position. They still have Mike Evans, and they still have Chris Godwin, who currently is on the PUP list after having a minor surgery to get those last couple of repairs out the way. I'm not taking a lot away from it. I'm not too worried about Godwin's injury. I expect him to be good to go by the season start, or at least within the week or two of the season starting. I think he'll be fine. It is just something to make note of, that if he has another injury, then it starts to be really scary. Especially now that he's going into his age 29 season, and Mike Evans is over 30 at this point. My thing, though, is they got a couple of receivers that very easily could replace those two guys over the next year or two. And those guys that I'm looking at are Emeka Egbuka and Jalen McMillan. McMillan was taken last year and Egbuka was taken this year. But man, let me tell you, McMillan's a guy that plays more predominantly outside, and Egbuka plays more in the slot, kind of like what we'd seen with Godwin, playing more towards the inside. The Buccaneers just have depth at those positions, and I could go on about it, but the fact that they also Trey Palmer, and they have other guys like very skinny, very undersized Tez Johnson, this offense is going to be lethal. And especially with an aggressive quarterback like Baker Mayfield, this is going to be tough for opposing defenses to have to figure out. I'm going to be honest. I look at them, and I do worry. The defense, and you look at the overall offensive line, tight ends, kind of not really much worried about. Cade Otton, he'll be there every once in a while, but he's not a big part. He's not a big focal point of this offense. He'll get the ball every once in a while, but not too much. Tristan Wirfs, who's currently out, dealing with an injury, I'm not too worried about it as of right now. But if it continues to linger, that is something to make note of. Because now that they have Graham Barden as their new center, they still have Cody Mock, they have Luke Godecki, and they have Ben Burdison. I think this is still a pretty solid, good group. I just don't feel as confident in it as in years past. It's still something, and I still think this is going to be one of the better offenses, especially with the depth that they have at wide receiver. But as long as the offensive line doesn't take a huge step back, I'm not too worried about the offense. They got plenty of depth. They have plenty of guys for Baker to get the ball to, and I feel confident that Baker is back to where he was just going back to even the beginning of his career when he started to really show the developments in Cleveland until an injury happened and everything just went down the toilet. And then he had to revive his career in Los Angeles. The defense, they did lose a couple of guys, but still looking at it, the fact that they do have Reddick, they still have Levante David. Anthony Walker is a guy that I like, and Yaya Diaby, as well as Kalijah Kancey and Logan Hall surrounding the centerpiece that is Vita Vea. I was talking about Vince Wilfork earlier for the Saints with Devon Godshaw. You want Devon Godshaw to be even a fraction of what Vita Vea is. Because Vita, holy cow, the best nose tackle, I'd say, in the NFL. And if he's not, he's close. He's top 2 or 3 for sure. He's one of the best out there. This front 7 for Tampa, it's scary. That's still a really good group. I still have big question marks about the secondary. Because outside of Antoine Walker at safety, I'm still looking at Zion McCullum. I'm still looking at Jamel Dean. I'm looking at Christian Ezian and Tyke Smith. Like, Tyke, he actually showed some signs. He looked pretty solid. But I'm still not confident in it. Outside of Antoine Winfield, I'm not confident in that secondary. The only thing that makes it supplemental and makes it serviceable is the fact that that front 7 is as good and as deep as it is. So, Tampa, they lost a couple of guys, but they still have quite a bit from last year. They didn't change too much, which was a good thing. And they made some good, necessary additions. Hassan Reddick, the fact that he's going to be their premier edge rusher, oh man, that's going to be tough. That's going to be a tough blocking assignment for whichever tackles have to go against him. So Tampa, even though they lost a couple of guys, I'm still looking at this team to look pretty darn good. So that's going to do it for the NFC side. Looking towards the AFC side, I think what's a little bit interesting, and if we're going to start with anybody, let's start with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Jacksonville, they ended up getting Patrick McCarry, which was good. Another addition to the offensive line, which is something that they really needed to address. Jordan Lewis is a guy that I really liked. I thought he was a pretty good corner. The other big addition was the fact that they did get Robert Hainsley, so they addressed the offensive line not once but twice in a big-time way. They did it in other ways as well, but those were the main two. You look at the players that left, and there was quite a bit of them. Evan Ingram, he ended up going to Denver. Andre Sisco signed a one-year deal with the Jets. Luke Farrell, one of their tight ends, he went to San Francisco along with Mac Jones. Ronald Darby and a couple other guys that were either getting older or were some depth pieces that you didn't really need. They moved on, but I still do have really big-time question marks about Jacksonville. Because even though they did have a good draft, I'd say it wasn't too bad. Some of the guys that they ended up drafting was Travis Hunter. The fact that that was such an aggressive move, I have been talking about it how I would have rather Ashton Genty won the Heisman, but just the best player overall, because he's really good at wide receiver and he's good at cornerback. But the fact that you're basically shoring up two positions with one pick, that can make a huge difference. This is a big-time sink or swim scenario. Because if Travis Hunter becomes the guy that we think he can be, and if he can actually prove himself to be a quality corner and receiver and play both sides of the football and play a lot of quality snaps on both sides, this could change a lot about the franchise. I really think so. A lot has to go right, but if Travis can prove himself as a really good wide receiver and corner and play a lot of both, I think a lot could change positively for Jacksonville. Now, if it sucks, then it's really going to hurt them. Really going to hurt them. Because if you're spending a number 2 overall pick on a guy that plays wide receiver or corner, that's rough. Because that could have gone towards offensive line. It could have gone towards defensive line. They made that aggressive move. They could have got Mason Graham. They could have got Abdul Carter. They could have got somebody, especially with that second overall pick. They chose Travis Hunter. If Travis works out for them, I could see a lot change with Jacksonville. I think we could see them get back into the playoffs from not too long ago. They made some other additions. They didn't have another pick until the 3rd round because they got Caleb Ransall from Tulane, a cornerback. They ended up getting Wyatt Milliam out of West Virginia, a guard. They got Bayshaw Tootin, so another running back for them in that room out of Virginia Tech. And then they got a couple other guys, including Jack Kaiser out of Notre Dame, Jalen McLeod. So 2 linebackers in the 4th and 6th round out of Notre Dame and Auburn. They got Rayun Lane III out of Navy. Jonah Monheim out of USC, another center. So they got another offensive lineman for depth purposes. And LaQuint Allen, a running back out of Syracuse. The only really big-time move was Travis Hunter. Everything else was kind of meh. Tootin's an interesting piece, but if you look at the depth chart, I know that Travis Etienne started to take a little bit of a dip, but I still think he's still going to get a lot of quality snaps for them. But Tank Bigsby in that backfield is someone to really make note of because he's gotten quite a bit of noise and gotten a lot of attention from people over there in Jacksonville with how often he's gotten first-team reps. It's actually kind of odd. I understand that people were down last year on Travis, but still. I would have thought Etienne still would have gotten a majority of the first-team reps. Maybe it changes. Who knows? But that's something to make note of. That's something to look out for as we go through the rest of training camp. Trevor Lawrence someone that really needs to step up this next year. You're not getting paid $50 million to do nothing. So you need to see T-Law actually start to progress once again. Because he was starting to, and then injuries and other circumstances, that went by the wayside and his play on the field started to take a dip. They ended up getting Liam Cohen as their new head coach. So you expect them to start to take that step forward and hopefully get back to being a productive offensive team. And part of that is not only because of the running back room and also having competent quarterback play once again, but the fact that you got so much of the wide receiver room. Brian Thomas Jr. really showed that he is an alpha wide receiver last year in his rookie season. Travis Hunter hopefully is a really nice complement wide receiver 2 for him. De'Ami Brown, I think, could be a solid wide receiver 3 for them. But I am curious what happens at that tight end position. Because now that Evan Ingram is gone, Brenton Strange has an opportunity to prove himself. But I'm not expecting too much from him. He's a guy that hasn't gotten a whole lot of production throughout the early part of his career. Because even if you look at it last year, got a solid amount of production. 40 catches, 411, 2 tutties. It's not too bad for the 24-year-old out of Penn State. But is he ready for that starting tight end position? Is he ready to do it full-time? I don't know. I want to see it, though. I am curious. I think he could. I just want to see it. Because other guys like Hunter Long and Johnny Munt, not starters. I'm not fully confident that Johnny Munt's a tight end 2. I think he should be fighting for that last tight end spot on whatever team he'd be on. Like, for example, the Jags right now. But the fact that he's tight end number 2, I did mention that they put a lot of effort, the Jags did, into the offensive line. They still have Walker Little. They still have Anton Harrison. But they put quite a bit of emphasis into the center and guard positions. Ezra Cleveland's still there. Going back, Hainsey and Macari. Both of those guys were additions to the offensive line. We'll see if it works out. I'm not too confident. But, I mean, this is an offensive-minded head coach in Liam Cohen. So the expectation would be that they actually are more productive on that side of the football. Looking towards the defensive side, Josh Hines-Allen, still a pretty good edge rusher, along with Eric Armstead and Trayvon Walker and Devon Hamilton as that front 4. I like those guys. I like them a lot. And I like Fauci Aluakon as well as Devin Lloyd. But the overall group as a whole, I don't know. I'm still very curious to see what they can do. The secondary, you feel more confident, or at least I feel more confident. I feel like Travis Hunter has a very good opportunity to prove himself to actually be one of the starting boundary corners for them. But Tyson Campbell and Jerry Jones are holding down those positions right now. Safety feels pretty scary, I'm not going to lie, with Eric Murray and Darnell Savage playing those roles. The defense still worries me. If you're going to get into shootouts, just make sure you get Travis and Brian Thomas the ball as much as possible. But this is still a team that has a lot to figure out before we can feel any sort of confidence that they have a chance of making the playoffs. Next up in the AFC South, we'll look towards, how about the Indianapolis Colts? They're a team that made quite a few additions. The big-time additions that they got were Travarius Ward from San Francisco, as well as Cam Bynum. So they got 2 big guys in the secondary. And I guess the other guy that you would make note would be Daniel Jones, since he did sign a 1-year deal and he was a starter. The thing about them that I look towards is the quarterback position with Anthony Richardson and Jones. Because I don't think that Jones is a competent guy that you can ask for to be a starting quarterback. I'm going to be honest. I think you need a couple more years before you can kind of go through that Sam Darnold effect almost. Or if you want to look at Geno Smith as well. But Anthony Richardson really needs to make sure that he steps up. I'm going to be honest. I think if he does so, I feel a little bit more confident in his ability, and I feel like this offense that they put a lot into could actually be more competent than we'd seen in years past. But it really falls on AR. It really falls on Anthony Richardson, because if you have to start Daniel Jones, it's one of two things. Either Richardson is still injured or further injures himself, or he's just been that bad. And that's not a good sign if you're an Indianapolis Colts fan. Jonathan Taylor, still one of the better running backs in the NFL. Still feel really confident in him, especially when he has a healthy offensive line. Really not much has changed there. You still have Quentin Nelson. You still have Braden Smith. And you still have Bernard Ryman. It feels like a solid group on the offensive line, but I still need to make sure that guys like Tyler Warren, who they took in the first round, can actually get the ball a good bit, because Michael Pittman at wide receiver, Alec Pierce, and Josh Downs, and even Adonai Mitchell, if those guys can't get the ball and get a consistent ball from Anthony Richardson, we're going to just see more of the same from the Colts offense as we've seen the last couple of years. AR is going to be the main passer, obviously, but also he's going to be someone that you look out for in the running game to go along with Taylor, but AR needs to be healthy. That's the big thing. Not only does he need to be healthy, but he also needs to make sure that he takes those steps forward as a quarterback, because you haven't seen it. You haven't seen it consistently. The arm talent and the arm strength for sure is there, but the decision making and the touch that he has and the accuracy that he has is so inconsistent. If he hones in on those skills, you feel so much more confident in AR, and you can be like, this is what we were looking for, because these are solid skill position groups. The fact that you have a versatile piece in Warren now, the fact that you still have a solid wide receiver group, and you still have a really good running back in Taylor, and the offensive line is solid as well. If Anthony can step up and be the quarterback that we think he can be, and if he maxes that potential, or at least gets close to it, this Colts team and this Colts offense could just go stratospheres ahead of what we've seen the last couple of years. I brought up the big-time additions in the secondary, and there's no doubt about it. Ward and Bynum, that's really going to help them, because I've had a really big question mark about that over the last couple of years. They still have Kenny Moore, who's all right. Nick Cross, who's up and down as a safety for him, and then having Jalen Jones as their main other boundary corner. It's hit or miss. I do think the free agency additions that they made were absolutely necessary. They needed it a lot, and I think it definitely improves them. I just don't think it's great. I don't think it's all that good. They still have some other guys that I'm curious about, like Laiatu Latu and DeForest Buckner and Kwity Paye as their main defensive linemen. I don't mind it. I think it's pretty good. I just think it could be better. I think if we can continue to see them make strides, because they do have Sam Ebukam, who's another solid rotational piece, seeing if they can take those steps forward with the rest of the linebacker room, wouldn't mind it. Because even if you look at it from 2024 perspective, you look at the total sacks that team had and that defense had as a group, you look at them, it was 36. So just over 2 a game, which is okay. It's not bad. But if you really wanted to look at it, and you look at the opposing side, and you look at it from a league-wide perspective, you had Zaire Franklin, who led the NFL in tackles, which was really good. Absolute tackle machine with over 170. But at the same time, sacks play a big-time factor. And the fact that they had 36, which ranked near the bottom, if you want to look at it, New England had the least amount when it came to sacks. It's pretty tough. I'm going to be honest. Sacks, New England with 28, Indianapolis with 36. Only 8 teams had fewer numbers, including those Falcons and Panthers that I brought up earlier. And same thing with the Jags. Like, all these teams, like, I feel like they have good front sevens, and I don't mind them. They're just never that productive, and they never get those high sack totals that I would think they would get. I would think they'd be closer towards the middle of the pack, yet they never are. It's so odd. It's so weird to me. But if you could get more production out of them, which maybe you do, maybe the fact that you get better secondary play by proxy helps get a couple more sacks under guys like Kwity Paye and DeForest Buckner's belt, which you would hope so. But will they? I don't know. I don't feel confident in it, that's for sure. The secondary, as I brought up, feel good about it. And then even if you look at the special teams, I can't really complain too much about it. It was a solid group. Spencer Schrader and then Rigoberto Sanchez. Could see some good stuff from them. But you need more opportunity from Schrader if Anthony Richardson and that offense actually starts to click. Again, I think the big-time part of the success for the Colts heavily rides on, can Anthony Richardson actually be a competent, more consistent quarterback? That's what it really, really boils down to. Looking next to the Houston Texans, they took a down year. They replaced their offensive coordinator, which was good, I guess. I don't know, it was weird because we were so high on him, and then the offense doesn't do great for 1 year, and all of a sudden he gets fired. I mean, I know that we started to become more and more impatient, but man, it caught me by surprise. I'm not going to lie. What's really interesting, if you look at the free agency class for Houston, was the fact that they didn't make any big-time deals. No 3-4 year deals that are worth $60, $70, $80 million. No. The Texans did not do that. If anything, what they did was they got a lot of 1-year deals. Cam Robinson, Sheldon Rankins, Darrell Taylor, and Mario Edwards, and a couple others. Like, all those guys got pretty small deals. So it's not like there was any big-time additions that the Houston Texans made. I'm not going to spend too much time on them because I thought what was really interesting, they didn't have a first-round pick, but they got not one but two Iowa State receivers in Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. They addressed the offensive line with getting the guy out of Minnesota, Ursary. Ariante? I struggled with that one, but we'll see. They got Woody Marks, another running back, and what's interesting to note is that Joe Mixon so far is injured and is starting to need some extra help, I guess you could say, in training camp. But one thing that I really note about them, CJ Stroud, I still think is one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, and really just needs more help around him. I think they definitely helped him by getting more guys at the skill positions, because he still has Nico Collins. If Tank Dell actually returns to the field and maybe could be what he once was, you feel even better. But the fact that they put the investment into the Cyclone receivers will help eventually replace Christian Kirk. So I don't feel bad with wide receivers at all if I'm a Houston Texans fan. And even though Joe Mixon is injured, the fact that they did get Nick Chubb as well as another one of those free agency additions, him plus Woody Marks, and if Dameon Pierce could get healthy as well, that running back room is pretty deep. There's no doubt about it. I think there's still a little bit left on those Nick Chubb tires. My big thing, though, is that offensive line. They got Cam Robinson on a 1-year deal, which is not bad. But you look at the rest of it, Laken Tomlinson, Jake Andrews at center, Titus Howard at right guard, and then Blake Fisher right tackle. Like, I thought that was a big thing that they needed to address over the offseason. And outside of getting Ursary, I'm not that impressed. I'm going to be honest. Like, I'm scared for CJ Stroud's life. He's got the skill guys, and he's got a new OC to work with, and I'm sure he's absolutely locking in because last year all he did was do podcasts and do commercials and stuff. But I don't feel confident by any stretch of the imagination in this Houston Texans offensive line. Now, what does help them, not only with the skill positions and having one of the better quarterbacks in my eyes, but the fact that you have the defensive-minded head coach that has a good defense. Derek Stingley Jr., one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, just got paid like one. Will Anderson, who, really good edge rusher along the defensive line. Feel really good about him alongside Daniil Hunter, former LSU Tiger. Henry To'o, and then Azeez Al-Jair and EJ Speed. That linebacker group is really good. Really good. And then they still have Christian Harris as another guy that was an underrated piece for them. They actually got Casey Osai, former Louisiana Raging Cajun, for them as well to be a part of that rotation potentially. That front seven's really good. I like the secondary because they have C.J. Gardner-Johnson, they have Kalen Balak, and they even have Kamari Lassiter with even Jalen Petrie as well. This defense, really good. Wide receivers, I feel good about. Running back, it's not great, but there's a lot of depth. Dalton Schultz at tight end, can't be mad at it. And then C.J. Stroud, one of the best young developing quarterbacks in the league, who is ready from day one. I love it all. I love Kaimi Fairbairn. Still one of the better kickers. I still feel good about him. And even having Tommy Townsend as a punter. The only thing that scares me about this team that I think could hold them back is that offensive line. That is the big thing about it all that scares me. It's just the offensive line. Because if they can just somehow keep C.J. Stroud on his feet long enough to deliver the football and doesn't get him injured, they still have a very good chance of making the playoffs, especially in this weak division, because the Colts still question. Jacksonville, still question. And then you look towards the final team that we're going to look at for this episode of Cleats and Sneaks. It is the Tennessee Titans. Now look, the big-time addition, and it wasn't in free agency, but the fact that they did get Cam Ward number 1 overall, that's nice to see. And they did move on. They got a new head coach as well. I'm just not confident in them. I'm going to be honest. I'm not confident in the Tennessee Titans. I do like the fact that they did get a new quarterback and they made that extra effort to go get Cam Ward. But man, oh man. And look, they did get his guy Xavier Restrepo, the other Miami Hurricane. He didn't get drafted, but they got him as a UDFA. But I look at this draft class for Tennessee. I'm not impressed with it. I'm really not. Gunnar Helm, sure, 4th round tight end. And then they even got Chamari Deke out of Florida. And then got Alec Aomanor as another receiver out of Stanford. Sure. But I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed with the edge rusher out of UCLA. I'm not impressed with Kevin Winstead out of Penn State. The draft class just... no one really stands out to me. I'm going to be honest. I think the best receiver that they got was Restrepo because he has rapport with Ward. He's a UDFA. The other 2 guys that they took at wide receiver, Aomanor and Deke, I don't know. I'm just not impressed with them. I don't think that they're going to be guys that are going to be able to carve a real role in this Tennessee offense. Now, the thing is, Tennessee did just get rid of Treylon Burks, so there is more opportunity for those guys to actually have a role. But at this point, they still have Calvin Ridley. They still have Tyler Lockett. They still have Van Jefferson, which Van Jefferson, we'll see. I believe more in Restrepo than I do Jefferson at this point, and who knows what's left in Tyler Lockett. But Calvin Ridley's still got something to prove. I think he's still got one more good year left in him. The only thing, though, is what's behind Cam Ward in the backfield? Tony Pollard? Tajay Spears? Julius Chestnut? Really? Those are the guys that we're relying on? And then you look at tight end. I brought up Helm, but he's behind Josh Weil and Chig Okonkwo. I'm not big on those guys either. I'm not expecting too much. And then look, they got Peter Skoronski, they got Lloyd Cushenberry, they got Kevin Zeitler. or Zeitler, and they got J.C. Latham, and then Dan Moore Jr. at left tackle. But I'm not crazy impressed with this offensive line either. Like, this offense as a whole around Cam Ward, I think needs a lot of improvement before we can have any sort of confidence in the Titans. And also just the fact that Cam Ward, he's going to go through those rookie growing pains. Let's be honest, it's going to happen. There's a reason why Tennessee was the number 1 pick in last year's draft. And even if you want to look at the defense, like, okay, L'Jarius Sneed, they got him last year, but he's currently injured. Jarvis Brownlee Jr. is the other cornerback. Amani Hooker and Xavier Woods at safety. I'm not impressed with that duo. And then Roger McCreary as their nickelback. You want to look at the front 7? Jeffrey Simmons still there. Okay. I like that. Draymond Jones, not too bad. Devondre Sweat, it's okay. Could be better, but okay. But then you look at the linebackers. Cody Barton. Okay, he had a really good year last year. There's no doubt about that. But Otis Reese IV? Arden Key? Cedric Gray? James Williams? Anthony Orji? Like, I'm looking at this team, and I'm looking at the defensive line, and I'm looking at the secondary. Like, this defense to me is not good. Outside of Jeffrey Simmons, I am not impressed. I'm not impressed with the offense outside of Cam Ward and maybe Calvin Ridley and I guess Restrepo, even though the big part of it is just because he has such a rapport with Cam Ward. Outside of that, I'm not impressed with Tennessee at all. Joey Sly and Johnny Hecker, sure, the special teams and those guys, they look good. Not too worried about that. But the team as a whole, Tennessee, I'm not loving it. I'm not expecting too much out of the Titans in this year. That's going to wrap it up for Cleats and Sneaks. This was a long one. There's no doubt about that. Appreciate you tuning in if you stayed through the whole way through. We'll be back next time looking at yet another set of Cardinal Direction of divisions. Maybe it's the East. Maybe it's the North. Maybe it's the West. Who knows? You'll have to find out on the next edition. Appreciate you tuning in, and I'll talk to you next time.